You know those videos I made a year ago talking about the changes coming to the airspace system and how the sky is falling?
Hey you, listen! The future of drones as we know is in danger of being changed forever. Forces at work are trying to take your rights as pilots away, and if you don't do something now, it may be too late. Join the FPV Freedom Coalition today and contact your senators. Protect Section 336 and fight for your rights as pilots to fly freely. Don't let the forces of evil win. Quickly, check the links in the description of this video to find out how to fight before it's too late!
Yeah, no, the sky is actually kind of already starting to fall. It's not as bad as you probably think it is, and it's not as bad as some probably think I'm making it out to be, but the sky is kind of falling. If you're a hobbyist flying a drone in the airspace system, things have changed. And I don't mean that as in things are changing. I mean, they are changing, but things are already changed. So as of now, within 5 miles of an airport, you no longer have to contact the airport to let them know you're flying. No, you have to request permission via the LAANC system, which is the low altitude. Gosh dang, what does it stand for? This is why I don't like acronyms. The Low Altitude Authorization Notification Capability, also known as LANC, is going to be the system that we have to report to. So around airports, generally there's controlled airspace. And as hobbyists, generally you're not thinking about controlled airspace. Controlled airspace is something that professionals, Part 107 pilots, actual pilots think about. It's not something hobbyists have had to think about really before. The general rule of thumb has been if you're within 5 miles of an airport, you call them up, call the tower, you say, hey, yo, I'm flying. And they're like, go away, we don't care. And that has been the way it's been for many years. And the reason for that is that under Section 336, which was a mandate by Congress, the FAA could not put in place rules and regulations to actually kind of rule over hobbyists. As a hobbyist, you had a lot of freedoms within the airspace to do a lot of things that people have been doing safely now for over 100 years. And this has been kind of why it's a big change. And this is what has changed now. That rule is dead. Section 336 is dead. The Reauthorization Act was pushed through with the Sports Medicine Bill. Let me reiterate this. The Reauthorization Act was tacked onto, you hear about this all the time, but this is like an actual case of where it happened. At the end of 2018, they pushed it through legislature by tacking it onto an existing bill that's really hard to want to be against, which was the Sports Medicine Bill. Obviously, we want to approve things for sports medicines, right? And so that's what happened is they tacked on the entire Reauthorization Act, which is huge. It encapsulates quite a bit more than past reauthorization acts. And they tacked it on to another bill, which was passed through and signed by El Presidente. So we have now, the FAA has now the ability to govern over hobbyists, whereas before there was a mandate by Congress stating that they could not. That mandate has been overturned and is now eradicated thanks to the new Reauthorization Act. This is a huge disappointment to the hobby community, I believe, because now not only do we have to deal with the LANC system if we're close to airports, but in 2020, you'll have to, wow, 2020, we are really getting into the future now. So going into 2020, you're going to have to pass an aeronautical knowledge test, register your drone. Remote ID is going to be a thing. And they're going to require, I believe at this point in time, hobbyists to remote ID their drones. And currently, the cheapest and lightest system weighs 5 grams and it's $250. That's a huge ask of pilots to do. And then on top of that, you'll have to register the drone. So you have to pass a test, you'll have remote ID, you have to register the drone, you have to also use the LANC system. That's asking a lot of a hobbyist to do. And at this point in time, especially now with the interim rule, gosh, I need to reset. I just want to fly my drone! Oh, right now with the interim rule, hobbyists within 5 miles of an airport or within controlled airspace cannot fly. And this is a big deal. So right now I'm using an app called AirMap. This is a really great app. If you do not have an app like AirMap, you need to get one now. That tells you where you can and cannot fly. Now, the issues with apps like these, even AirMap has gaps in its knowledge of where a hobbyist can and cannot fly. For instance, there could be wildlife reserves that have no drone rules that are not illustrated on this map. This map is primarily dealing with controlled airspace, which is what the LANC system is, again, dealing with. So, going into this, if you look, you see all these blue areas, all those little things, those grids? That is controlled airspace. You see where I'm at? I'm actually on this island. And if I fly on the island, there's going to be advisories. Now, those advisories are telling me it's controlled airspace. And as a hobbyist, right now, you have to ask permission to use the airspace. Now, the issue is that this app for hobbyists is currently not set up, to my knowledge, to actually deal with the LANC system. So meaning, as a hobbyist, I cannot fly here until they implement the new system, which is crazy. Because before, I would just have to contact the tower, or even with the app, just request permission, which contacts the tower for you. Now it's going to be a matter of they can start denying pilots permission to fly in a certain location. Now, majority of these applications are automated. Now, for me as a Part 107 pilot, I do have access to the LANC system, which is great. But it also means if I fly under the LANC system and fly right now as a Part 107 pilot, all my flights that would be for hobby use would also be counted for commercial use, which is not what I want to do. And on top of that, and I think the bigger issue is that this adversely affects a lot of pilots out there that don't even know what's going on. I mean, the chances of the FAA trying to enforce this interim rule where, pilots are going to be flying in controlled airspace because they don't know that it's controlled airspace, and also they don't know about the new rule changes, it's going to create kind of confusion and havoc. Because right now, I can see people flying into controlled airspace. I've seen pilots, not even my friends, I'm talking about people on the island, they'll pull a Mavic out, they'll be like, oh yeah, no, I'll click the OK button, and they'll wing it out into areas where it would be technically illegal for them to fly right now. And it's not an issue of the pilot. This is not on the pilots. Pilots are not the ones that should be in the wrong. I mean, we've been flying safely for over 100 years now, and it's a thing of education. The FAA, 1, does not educate pilots that this is happening enough. 2, sprung it. This change, especially with the new LAANC system, a lot of pilots knew it was going to probably be pushed into effect, but they just made the change like last week. Like, they just made it a legality for pilots to have to use the system with not having the system in place. Which, I'm pretty sure, I'm not a lawyer, but if I was a lawyer, I'm pretty sure there's probably something fishy there. Because how do you hold people to, I don't know. So essentially right now, pilots are being told to not fly in controlled airspace, to not contact the towers. And this has shut down the majority of my spots here in San Diego. And to the point of where I have to travel outside of my traditional area to fly. And for me, that means enduring more physical pain. Traveling for me, even 15 minutes, means I'm in pain. When I go and run errands for the day, I dedicate the entire day to running errands because I am going to be in pain afterwards from running them. And I'm pretty much useless. So, for me, I like the ability to go fly my drone within a couple 100 feet of myself, not going up into, really, the airspace above me. But now, if I want to do that, I'm a criminal. And quite honestly, I've flown a couple of times without realizing it since the new rules and regulations have gone through, and that means I am a criminal. FAA, I broke your new rules without realizing it. And I know there's a bunch of other pilots that are breaking those rules too without realizing it. And this is really what creates the frustration is because now, especially when the rules go forward in the future, there's going to be a bunch of pilots that will not want to follow these rules. And now that the FAA, with the Reauthorization Act, has the ability to enforce them, whereas before they didn't. And by force them, I mean actually have money set up and have people in their departments that will be dedicated to enforcing the new rules. We didn't have that before. So there will be pilots that will be caught up in this. The FAA, at some point in time, will have to try these cases in court for it to become a real law. I'm getting frustrated. I don't want to see pilots caught up in this mess. I don't want to see the FAA trying to enforce the new rules and regulations and trying to make examples out of pilots. That's my biggest worry, because in order for them, I guess, to kind of force people into the system, they're going to have to enforce it. And right now, and up until now, the FAA hasn't had the legal ability to, largely, and they haven't had the framework to. But going forward, they will. And that's a big change that pilots, I don't think, are really understanding of. I want to follow the rules. I want to also have other pilots follow the rules. And I'm worried that if we don't start pushing back in a real way, as in contacting the Drone Advisory Committee, if we don't contact the Drone Advisory Committee, if we don't push ourselves onto the FAA, we will be forgotten about. The people that are writing these rules and regulations are part of the industry. We have one person right now within the Drone Advisory Committee, which is made up of, I believe, 20 people at this point, and they're adding 12 more. Only one of those people speaks for hobbyists to the FAA, and that's Rich Hansen at the AMA. And Rich is one of the cooler cats that I've been able to know in this game, and I had the pleasure of talking to him a couple times. And he is honestly trying his best to do what's right for all of us as hobbyists. But he does not have the ability to be a Spartan warrior to ward off the other members of that group. When you have commercial interests that now 3 members of the Drone Advisory Committee also are working to incorporate LAANC into their technologies. As in, they're creating applications and or other things that work with them. So they have a financial incentive in this game. And they're also working with the FAA to write the new rules and regulations. And you have multiples of those groups just within the LAANC system, and the people pushing internally for the new rules and regulations. You have 3 or 4 internal members versus Rich Hansen. And that's just within that. Then you have the whole other group of people that are pushing for either from law enforcement to all kinds of people within industry pushing for new regulations for drones and how to handle things going forward. And the biggest issue is that the hobbyists are not being spoken for properly. We are the biggest consumer / largest market right now. Drone hobbyists outnumber Part 107 pilots 5-1. That also is why there's a huge commercial and financial incentive for these companies to push for hobbyists to be under the same rules and regulations as commercial operators. Because all of a sudden, those remote ID tags that would be sold to 300,000 pilots are now sold to 1.25 million pilots. There's just so much financial gain to be had. And as hobbyists, what financial gain do we have to keep the airspace open? That's realistically the question. What financial interest do you have to keep it open? You don't. Flying for so many people is an escape. Is literally the thing. It's like a therapy for people. It is. I know it's not like a therapy. It is a therapy for people. It's a part of therapy for people. I know it was a therapy for me when I needed it most. And those people that use it for their escape, you don't want to turn it into a civil rights movement. You don't want to fight for your rights. This is your escape. And so these people that use it for their escape are largely going to continually do that. But now they're going to be doing it under the guise of breaking new rules and regulations because it's a little bit too difficult to follow them. And that's what's frustrating, is that there's going to be people that genuinely love flying FPV, that love flying drones, that will not only be turned off by these new rules and regulations, but will be even potentially criminalized by them. And then on top of that, you have what I think is the bigger issue for the hobby industry and why it needs to push back even more, is that I like flying with people. I like flying with my friends. If we continue down this pathway, no longer is it going to be as easy for people to get into. You're going to have to think about passing a test, tagging your system, signing up on Lance, and registering your drone. You're going to have to do all these things before you can enjoy the simplicity of flight. And that's where my frustrations come from, is that because of that, we're going to severely hinder the amount of people coming into it. Because it's easier to just go play a video game. It's easier to go do a lot of other things than to fly a drone. And it's already hard enough to fly a drone. So adding these additional barriers is just more frustrating. Especially because right now, within the new framework, there is no distinction between toy drones and full-sized drones, whereas in like things that weigh more than 5 pounds or 10 pounds or 20 pounds. Meaning that as of right now, the way that I understand it and the way it's been told to me by the FPV Freedom Coalition is that all drones are going to be regulated under the same set of rules. Meaning that a tiny whoop, even flying within controlled airspace in a safe location in someone's backyard, will be breaking these rules. That if I want to fly a tiny whoop, I'm going to have to pass a test, use Lance, ID tag, and all these other things before I will be legally allowed to fly outside. Whereas if I go indoors, it's not a problem. And that's what's really frustrating, is that these are unneeded rules and regulations. There's nothing to say that hobbyists can't fly within controlled airspace safely, as honestly they've been doing for a long time. I know a lot of pilots that fly as a hobbyist in controlled airspace pushing up against these rules and regulations. And the biggest one being shielded operations. If we just take for a second the fact that, yeah, hobbyists have been potentially breaking the rules, or at that point in time were the rules, because again, FAA had no ability to enforce their rules. They're just guidelines. If we just take that as an example of how hobbyists have been pushing against those guidelines and still nothing bad has happened, we should be able to carve out a section for hobbyists to continually do what they've been doing safely. And so this takes form of shielded operations. And shielded operations is something that New Zealand's actually passed, meaning that if you take the tallest object, and within 300 feet of that, you can fly under it. That's awesome. That solves so many problems. If you combine that with, again, adding a subclass of drones that aren't as heavily regulated because they're not a danger to full-scale aircraft, then you solve 90% of the frustration that's currently going to happen if things are pushed out the way they're currently being pushed out. So I see there's solves to this, and quite honestly, and this is why I still have hope, is that the FAA is not complete idiots. The guy in charge that's pushing through the next-gen system, he's a nice dude. He means the best. He's been working on modernizing the airspace system for over 10 years. Like, this is kind of his baby. But at the same time, he's not really thinking about hobbyists. He has a lot of different interests pulling at him, telling him how they want to see their vision of the airspace in the future implemented. And so their vision has shifted and moved into what it has. And in the process, they've really forgotten about the hobbyists. And if they say they haven't, they're not really thinking about it, because as they say, their current intentions and I quote, including everyone under the same rules really does move everything forward. And that's Jay Merkel's quote on how he sees things going forward. And that's meaning not creating a separate class of rules really for hobbyists or commercial operators. Everyone is kind of underneath the same blanket. That's their current vision. That's currently what's being implemented. And again, right now, I'm grounded in the majority of my spots. That's why I'm making this video and not my regular videos. Like, I just got back to making good content that I really enjoy watching again. And that's because I was having fun in those videos, enjoying it, and actually, like, really just, yeah. But with this, I am going to be constantly worried about, can I fly here? Oh, geez, I really want to find that spot, but if I post the video of me flying that spot, someone might make a stink of it. And as a YouTuber and as a, I don't know, a known personality in the community, I have a bigger X on my head than the average pilot who doesn't have a YouTube account, who doesn't post footage, and who doesn't care about the rules and regulations. And that's why I'm taking more of a stand, I think, than other people, and that's why probably going forward, I might not be making as many flight videos until things are cleared up. I know a lot of you are probably going to say, Zoe, just F the AAA and go fly. I'm not taking that defeatist attitude. I am taking a stand, if you will, of this is what I'm willing to accept, following the rules. If the rules don't make sense, then we need to push up against them so they make sense for hobbyists. And that's important. The way we do that is by joining the FPV Freedom Coalition, by joining the AMA, and by talking about these issues with your friends that fly. By making your own video talking about how you will be impacted by these new rules and regulations. By contacting the Drone Advisory Committee members and letting them know how you will be impacted by them and what it means to you to be able to continually and freely and openly use the airspace as you have for over 100 years again. Hobbyists have a very safe track record. And what's going to happen, and I really hope I'm wrong, again, what's going to happen, and I really hope I'm wrong, is that the FAA and the media will use a pilot example, as in someone will break these rules and regulations a bit honorously, and they will try to make an example out of them, just like they tried to do with Trappy. And it was in the instance of Trappy's case where the FAA had pushback, and they couldn't necessarily push forward. And honestly, there's been times where the FAA has tried to persecute drone pilots, and almost every single time on the hobbyist scale, they have lost. But things are different now. Section 336 has been a shield that had protected us for years and is no longer in place. I'm sorry this video is really long. There's a lot that needed to be said. There's still a lot that needs to be said. Currently on the island, if I want to fly, this is the sad part, if I want to fly down that way on the beach, I can't. I can fly a small portion of the beach on the other side. And for me, as an outlet, I really enjoy being able to go fly, again, for 5 minutes, not disturb anybody, not disturb the airspace, and get that enjoyment. Because for me, FPV is a bit of a therapy. It's a release. It's my outlet. And now I'm being told I've got to go travel to enjoy my outlet. And it's depressing because most people don't deal with pain, chronic pain. They don't deal with having to put themselves through pain to go do stuff. And it's really easy to write this off if you don't have to deal with that, or if you have a local flying field you go to anyways. But I know there's a lot of people that will be affected by it, and I know personally I am affected by it. And I am not going to just write these off. Yeah. I don't know anymore. I don't know. Um, I don't know. I don't know what else to say. I'm really kind of flustered and frustrated by everything that's going on. I wish I've done more. I wish I could have done more. Um, yeah.